Okay, we're going to the internet. Alrighty, guys. We're holding in the Gemorah towards the bottom of the page, Tzadik Ches Amid Beis. So it's 98-2 on the bottom. So he says, we're middle actually we left the middle of the Gemorah. The Gemorah we finished off, remember, we spoke about the different people that didn't want to live to see the Moshiach, being frightened by the days leading up to Mashiach. And we finished off with Rabbi Yochanan, who said that God may have questions, depending according to the opinion of Rashi or the Yad Ramah, where the God may have a question of, why the Jews better than other nations. So he doesn't want to live in such a time. On that statement comes the statement now that we're holding of Rav Papa. Rav Papa says, again, so according to Rashi, God is going to be challenged by why the Jewish people were worthy for redemption, hey Judith, and therefore Rabbi Yochanan doesn't want to live in such a time. So on this statement, Rav Papa says, this is what people say, means it's a common saying, I guess, in those days. Rohit v'nafel Torah v'azal v'shadi le'susa be'uryeh. An ox runs and falls, and it goes and casts a horse into its place, meaning into its stall. So we'll see how Rabbi Steinsaltz, because again, there's different opinions how to understand this statement. The ox being the Jewish people and the horse being the nations. They says, although the horse is inferior, is an inferior work animal relative to the ox could plow, etc. When there's no ox available, a horse must suffice. So after, hey Ariel, holding middle page 98-2. So too after the Jewish people sin, is as though the Holy Blessed be He has transferred their prominence to the Gentiles. Meaning to say that, hey Bruce, meaning to say that our Papa again is continuing on the line of Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan said he's scared because God is going to ask in the days of Mashiach why the Jewish people were worthy of redemption. So Rav Papa says this is now Rav Steinsaltz is translating according to Rashi, which says that once, even though the ox is better, the Jewish people are better, but once the Jewish people have fallen in sin and exile, so then God kind of gave His blessing to the nations, and now once the nations are doing it, it's a horse, it's not an ox, but he'll stick with the horse. The Yad Ramah learns that the pshat differently. We'll see in a second. Let's see what Rashi says. Right v'nafel Torah, when the ox falls down, then they use the horse. So Rashi explains, if the ox is running and falls, then we use a horse instead of the ox. That's something we would not have wanted to use beforehand. It's not our first choice to use the horse. Our first choice is to use the ox before the ox falls. The ox was very dear to the farmer, to the owner. What's going to happen when the ox heals, and now the ox is ready for his job back to be the animal of choice for the farmer? So he says, so Rashi says, then it becomes difficult for the owner to move the horse back into the barn and to now use the ox again. So therefore he explains, so he says, so to God, once he sees the falling of the Jewish people in the destruction of the temple and the exile, God lifted up, like it says, when Yaakov falls, Esav rises. So God gave Gedula, greatness, to the nations. Now the Jewish people did tshuva, and they get redeemed. It becomes a difficult choice for God to push away the nations for Israel. It's a very schwere Gemara, what they say in Yiddish, a difficult Gemara to understand. The Yad Ramah is, like we said before, does not agree with Rashi's interpretation that this is a choice that God is ever even questioning the nations over the Jewish people. So the Yad Ramah says also over here that even though the ox becomes tired and falls down, nevertheless he gores the horse back into his stall. And so too in the midah of Kadosh Baruch Hu, even though it may seem that God is concerned with losing the nations. Nevertheless, he pushes them away for his children, which are the Jewish people, and he disagrees with Rashi. So we have the two understandings of Rabbi Yochanan and the statement of Rav Papa explaining Rabbi Yochanan. Orya, he says, is Susim Orya is Orva Susim, is the stall. So the stall, he doesn't want to take the horse out of the stall or put it back in the stall, but according to Yad Ramah, the ox gores or frightens the horse back into the stall. Okay, so the Yad Ramah accepts it, basically, even though Rabbi Yochanan doesn't want to live in such a time, Yad Ramah does not subscribe to the idea that there's never going to be a challenge, a question of God not wanting to redeem the Jewish people. He says over here, he quotes the Ramah, Rabbi Steinzatz. He says, some explain this to me that even when the ox runs and then falls, which is the Jewish people, down, exhausted, remains strong enough to cast the horse into the barn. Likewise, with regard to the Jewish people, even when they are in descent, they remain deserving to have the nations destroyed before them. This is what the Yad Ramah. And you have to also remember when the Yad Ramah lived, Rashi, the all different times, Yad Ramah lived after Rashi. Okay, so that's different of opinions. And let's move forward. Amar Rav Gidl. Rav Gidl says that Amar Rav, he says it in the name of Rav, that Asid in Yisrael the Achlish Shnei Mashiach. That he says the Jewish people are destined to eat from the bounty and enjoy the years of Mashiach. Amar Rabbi Yosef Pshita. So Rabbi Yosef says that's obvious. Well, I mean, who's going to be enjoying the days of Mashiach if not the Jewish people? So he said he asks in an exaggerated chilak ubilak. We'll see chilak ubilak basically are bandits or other kind of people of lack of interest. So who's going to benefit from Mashiach? Chilak and bilak achli lahu. So he says lafukim in Rabbi Hillel. We have a very difficult opinion here, which is the opinion of Rabbi Hillel. Rabbi Hillel, it's interesting. He spells it with a yud. Seems to be a descendant of Hillel the Great, kind of in the generation of the initial Mishnah, and it says like this: the Amr Mashiach Yisrael. He says there's not going to be the days of Mashiach for the Jewish people. Reb Hillel says Shekvar Achlu B'mei the opinion of Reb Hillel is that Mashiach has already come, or we've lost our chance in the days of the King Chizkiyahu. Chizkiyahu, we learned already. Chizkiyahu lived in the time before the destruction of the first temple. And we learned the Gemorah, it says God wanted to make Chizkiyahu the Mashiach. But Reb Hillel says we kind of lost our opportunity. Later, Rashi is going to say on Reb Hillel, not to say that God won't redeem the Jewish people, but that there won't be a Mashiach. Not everyone agrees with that opinion of Rashi, but that that's what Hillel means. And the Gemara does not accept the opinion of Hillel at all. The Gemara says, and others say that if someone even accepts the opinion of Hillel, then that is a person who doesn't agree with the rabbis because the rabbis do not agree with Hillel. But Hillel, as an isolated opinion, says that Mashiach will not come for the Jewish people because we lost our opportunity in the days of Chizkiyahu. Again, Rashi says that God will redeem the Jewish people, not Mashiach. Again, a difficult opinion. So he says, Ariel, I'm just going to put you on mute a second because there's some spam coming on, some noise coming over. Any questions, please unmute yourself. So he says like this. So he says, the Achli Shnei Mashiach, so Rashi says that the Jewish people are going to eat in the days of Mashiach. All the great wealth, Soiva is satisfaction, that's going to be in the days of Mashiach are going to be for the Jewish people. This is the opinion of Rav Gidl, name of Rav, to disagree with Hillel. Again, Hillel is not Hillel the elder, that is the founding fathers of the house of Hillel, the first Nasi of the house of Hillel, but a descendant of his. I think it's the Hillel who authored the mission, the calendar. So the Gemara asks, if not the Jewish people, who's going to eat it? Chilik and Bilik? Achli lahu. So we'll learn this Rashi quickly because the point is, who's going to eat it? The demons. Are the demons going to eat from the days of Mashiach? So he quotes Masechtas Chul and Leichilik Yadan of Leibilik Yadan. Again, the Gemara he brings places where the Gemara uses the word Chilik and Bilik in a way of kind of a conversation where we're talking a little bit exaggerated about trying to understand the context of the subject. V'li the mashma lashon Chilik ubilik lashon churva k'may buka umavuka umavulka v'rin chulim leichilik the rabbanim striking l'chalak hasiman shmazrich l'chalak called Tabas with the Sharik al Pnei Pan Kulei. Okay, this is Rashi quotes that could be the word Chiluk and Bilik is applicable to the laws of shechting, of slaughtering. About, like it says, Rabbi Yossi, do you have to cut both sides of both of the simanim of the animal? Let's just skip out to the next one. He says, "V'nira l'moirai." My teacher says, "The einlan loy mashmis loy hach v'loy hasem." Lashon acher, it means to say it doesn't mean here or there. Or chiluk ubilik beis daines doim shahayu shmoisem kach. He says chiluk and bilik were two judges in Stone. We know Stone was a horrible place, so they were the judges of Stone. And so again, the Gemara is using an exaggerated lashon. Who is going to be the ones who are going to benefit from the days of Mashiach? Okay, so Reb Hillel says, "A Mashiach l'Yisrael, sheChizkiyahu hoy Mashiach." Chizkiyahu was the Mashiach. V'lav nemar kol nevuos, and all the prophecies about Mashiach were referring to Chizkiyahu. And according to Hillel, is Atzmich Keren Leveis Yisrael v'Amid v'Ra'ah b'Oiz Hashem. These are all verses talking about the Mashiach, and Gidel and says in the name of Rav Gidel says in the name of Rav that Hillel says that these are prophecies that are referring to Chizkiyahu. And therefore, the Mashiach came already. And the Jewish people it didn't happen the way we would have liked, and we move on. Although, again, Rashi later is going to quote, we're going to quote this Hillel again. And Rashi is going to say that not the opinion of Hillel is that there won't be redemption, but that there won't be the Mashiach with the redemption. Here he brings down, the early commentaries discussed identities of Chilik and Bilik, who are these people that we're referring to as if everyone knows who they are, who appear elsewhere in Talmud as well. According to the tradition of the Gaonim, these were names of two violent people who were renowned for their worthlessness in that generation. The sages used those two as a paradigm for worthlessness. So again, who do you think is going to eat from the days of Mashiach? Is it going to be the people of worthlessness or the Jews? Of course, the Jews. Okay, now Rabbi Steinzas tells us who Rabbi Hillel is. He says, apparently Rabbi Hillel was the grandson of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. So Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is the last of the Tanoim. He's the one who authored the Mishnah. He's about 6 generations from Hillel the original, Hillel HaZaken, Hillel the elder. And the younger brother, this Hillel is also the younger brother of Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya, which was also a Nasi, like his grandfather, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, but in the times of the Jerusalem Talmud, we learn about Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya, not Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, not the same person, who was the Nasi in the generation. Some say that the statement attributed to Hillel in the second chapter of the Tractate of Avot are the statements of Rabbi Hillel. Okay, so the Gemara says that we find, Rabbi Shenza says that we find some statements later in the second chapter of Preke Chelek about Reb Hillel, and some people could understand that to be Hillel the elder again, because we already mentioned him in chapter 1, or some people say this is this Hillel the grandson. I'm not sure if this is still the same Hillel who authored the calendar. It could be that was a third Hillel, again from the same family. Okay, so what do we have from this statement? We have from the statement that Rav Gidel says in the name of Rav that the Jewish people are going to be the ones that are going to take the benefits. And he disagrees that with Hillel, who says there won't be, the Mashiach has already passed. Okay. Now the Gemara continues. Again, we're going to get back to this opinion of Hillel again, and the Gemara's feelings about his opinion. Amar Rav says, La Ivri Alma Ela David. The whole world was created for King David. So if King David, if not for King David, the world won't be created. It means the whole point of the creation was for King David, that it's going to author the Tehillim. Shmuel, who always is the Bar Plukta, the one who usually disagrees, the colleague and friend of Rav, says, no, it wasn't created for David, but for Moshe. The world was created for Moses. And Rabbi Yochanan, again, these are all 3 people lived pretty much in the same generation. Rabbi Yochanan may be a drop younger, but he lived very long, Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan lived in Tiberia and Tiberias in Israel. Rav and Shmuel, while they studied by Rebbe, they moved afterwards back to Bavel, and they're the founding fathers of the Talmud Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud. So Rabbi Yochanan, who had lived in Eretz Yisrael, said, no, the world was created for Mashiach. So we have 3 opinions, David, Moshe, and Mashiach. So Rashi says, why is it for David? Hey, Shuki, we're on getting towards the end of page 98 too. So why does Rav hold that the world was created in the merit of the future of King David? Because David's going to say, is going to sing praises to God, so therefore the world is created for the praises that the David's going to author. Shmuel says for Moshe, because B'Shul Moshe Shahaya Asi the Kabbalah Torah. So each one has the great accomplishments that they did. So David wrote the Tehillim, and Moshe received the Torah. Rashi doesn't explain because it's obvious why we would think Mashiach. Okay, now we're going to learn a very interesting Gemorah. It seems simple, but this is a Gemorah that's quoted many times. Meaning to say, now we want to know what's the name of Mashiach? And what we're going to see is most people are going to use names similar to their own to give a name to Mashiach. Devei Rabbi Shela, the yeshiva of Reb Shela said. So the school of Reb Shela said. So Mashmai, what's the name of Mashiach? So Devei Reb Shela, the yeshiva of Reb Shela says, Amrei Shilei Shemai, like their teacher. From here we see this is one of the foundations where the students of a great Rebbe always thought that their Rebbe was Mashiach. So the yeshiva of Shelai, of Rab Shelai, said that Shilai is his name, similar to their teacher. Shnemer Ad Ki Yaveh Shilai, because clearly Yaakov says Ad Ki Yaveh Shilai, that David's dynasty is going to rule until Mashiach comes, which is a reference to Mashiach. Devei Rabbi Yanai, the students of Rabbi Yanai, and the yeshiva of Rabbi Yanai, Amroi Yinun Shema. Yinun is also similar to Yanai, and like it says in Tehillim, Yehi Shemai La'olam. His name should be forever. May his name it isn't him. May his name endure forever. May his name continue as long as the sun. And that's a reference to Mashiach. The Revei Rabbi Chanina, Amar, the yeshiva, the students of Rabbi Chanina said, Chanina Shemai. His name is Chanina, like their teacher, Rabbi Chanina. Shnemar, and they have a verse to back that up. Asher loy etin lachem chanina. So that, as it says, for I will show you no favor. Chanina is favor from the word chen, which is a reference to the days of Mashiach. V'yesh Oimrim, it says those who say, it doesn't say who the Yesh Oimrim are. Till now we learned that the yeshiva of Shelai and the yeshiva of Yana and the yeshiva of Chanina all use the name to reference their teacher's name. That says Yesh Oimrim, those who say Menachem and Chizkiah Shemai. His name is Menachem, the son of Chizkiah. How do we know? Shinemar ki rochak mimenu Menachem meishiv nafshi, because it says because the comforter, the word Menachem is the word nechama, it's to comfort. That should relieve my soul is far from me, and that's a reference to Mashiach. The Rabban and the rabbis say chivara devei Rabbi Shmai. Now, exactly what this means with this difference of opinion, but chivara devei Rabbi means the leper of the house of Rebbe is his name. Shenemar, as we have a famous verse in Isaiah that talks about how the Mashiach is going to suffer for the sins of the Jewish people, as it says, Achen chalayinu, our illness, who nasai he carries, umacharivenu, our pain, sivalam he suffers, vanachnu chashavnu nagua, muke elikimu une. So he says, indeed, our illness he did bear, and our pains he endured, yet we did esteem him injured, stricken by God, and afflicted, which is a reference to Mashiach, that he's going to be a person who suffers. And we learned that already in the story of Eliyahu, Rabbi Shua ben Levi, who was told by Mashiach, he's a sufferer, he's a person, a leper, full of wounds and bandages. So let's see what the commentaries say, because there's a little bit of understanding here. He says, okay, let's first see Rashi, then let's look at some commentaries. Mashmoy Shal Mashiach. So there's the house of Yanai says Yinin Shmoy, K'ma Yanai. So you see, Rashi says, Kol Echad Eidosh Echad Shmo Achar Shmoy. Each one of the yeshivas learned that Mashiach's name was similar to their Rebbe. Lifnei Shemesh Achlei Nivra Hayishmoy Yinun, V'hainu Echad Mizayin Dvarim She'al Machshav Libaris. Rashi says that one of the initial thoughts, like in the beginning of creation, that God thought about in creation was the idea of Mashiach. Mashiach is one of the original thoughts that went into creation. Like it says, the spirit of Mashiach was hovering over the creation even before anything happened. It says, the idea that it says they're not going to have Chanina, they're not going to have grace, Means the Mashiach didn't come yet until the grace comes. Menachem ben Chizkiah. Okay, there's no Rashi on that. I'm not sure if it's missing something. Let me look at the original text. Menachem ben Chizkiah. Okay. Chivara devei Rabbi. So it says, Rashi says, what does that mean? Chivara devei Rabbi. Mitzayra shabais Rabbi. A leper from the house of Rabbi. Rabbi again is Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, the author of the Mishnah. So he says over here, he quotes the Sefer Yeshua's Moshiach. So it says, okay, the Marsha all agree that it's not just that there was the Rebbe. The Marsha says it was also to indicate that the name was a name that is a reference to Mashiach. Now, there is some commentary on the idea of the leper of the house of Rebbe. Some believe that this is Rebbe himself. That Rebbe, because Rebbe himself was a big sufferer. We know Rebbe suffered tremendous pain, stomach pain and other pains that Rebbe suffered. He was physically very, I don't know if unwell, but physically in a lot of pain. We know about the stories of the pain, the years Rebbe suffered from stomach pains. Others say that the idea of chivora is the idea of leprosy, which is white. Ariel, the idea of leprosy that is white, from the word chivor, it's white, that he's going to be very white, meaning very, he's going to have chivor, the Bay Rebbe means not from the house of Rebbe, but he's going to be very white with leprosy. The word Rebbe means Rav, a lot of leprosy. Others say that it was a student of Rebbe who was punished by Rebbe, and therefore he received leprosy for going into places of study that he shouldn't have. He studied about the chariot, etc. Okay, let's see what Rabbi Steinzat says. Mashmai, it is clear that the school of each of these sages here and in other similar statements in Midrashim suggest a name for the Mashiach similar to the name of his teacher. Shilei like Rabbi Shilo, Yanun like Rabbi Yanai, Hanina like Rabbi Hanina, based on the statement that each generation there are those worthy in terms of the spiritual greatness of redeeming the Jewish people. But the appropriate time had not yet arrived. Each school considered its leader to be of those people. The Gra, meaning the Gaon of Vilna, states that the letters of the word Mashiach, Mem, Shin, Yud, Hey, are the initials of the names suggested in the Gemorah, Menachem, Shila, Yinun, and Chanina. Even in later generations, there were sages who hinted in their writing and books that they were worthy to be the Redeemer of Israel. So we see that there's many generations were people who were worthy to be the Redeemer. What does it mean, Chivara debei Rabbi? So he quotes the Aruch that says, some explain that this means that the Mashiach will be a descendant of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, and he will be a leper, as noted in the verse. Others cite a variant reading, Havira Rav, meaning very white. In other words, that he will be greatly afflicted with leprosy. Okay, so again, the idea is that we've seen this already before. Reb Shua ben Levi, when he met Mashiach, that the Mashiach is going to be a person who suffers a lot. Okay, let's continue back to the original text. Amar Rav Nachman says, Imin Chayahu, if he's a person coming from someone who's alive, if Mashiach is going to be someone who's from the living, such as me. Means Rabbi Nachman qualified himself as being someone worthy of being the Mashiach. Shnemer v'haya adirei mimenu u'moishle mikir b'yetze. And their prince shall be of themselves, and their governor shall proceed from their midst, indicating that the Redeemer is already in power. So he's already in power, and then he's going to become the Mashiach. And therefore, Rabbi Nachman was one of those people who had the strength, Lorraine, welcome, to be the Mashiach. Rav says, Rav was a student of Rebbe, a student of Rebbe. He was really a student of his teacher, his uncle, Reb Chia, but he was also a student of Rebbe. So Amar Rav, Rav says if he's alive, he's Rebbe, Rebbeinu HaKadosh. Imin Meisahu, and if he's coming from the dead, Kigoin Daniel Ish Chamudus, like Daniel. So we know Daniel was the great visionary in the time of the destruction of the first temple in Babylonia, and he was we have the book of Daniel. So he says if he's from the living, he's Rebbeinu HaKadosh. If he's Rebbe, and if he's from the dead, he's Daniel. So Rashi says like this: Imin Chayahu, if he's from the living, Kigan Rebbeinu HaKadosh. Mashiach Moisei Shechayim Achshav. Rav says, I guess Rav said the statement earlier, because Rav lived only a little time with Rebbe, and then after Rebbe passed away, he moved back to Bavel. We know Rav as the great head of the yeshiva of Bavel, which is in Iraq. But in his early years, he was a student of Rebbe. So must have said the statement early on. Because Imin Chayhu, if Mashiach is from the living, he go in Rabbeinu Kodesh, he's like Rebbe. Im Mashiach Meisah Shechayim Achshav Vadi Hein Rabbeinu Kodesh. The Soivach Tachluyim V'chasid Gomorhu. He has all the qualifications. He suffers. Rebbe, like I said, Rebbe suffered. He's a chassid. He's a tremendous, kind, good person. And if you want to say the Mashiach is from those who died already, Daniel ish chamudais shenidim b'yisurin b'goy varayis. We don't have more than Daniel, who also suffered, and he was thrown into the lion's den. V'chasid Gemorah. V'hai ki goyin lav davka. V'hai ki goyin lav davka. So the question is, why does he say ki goyin Rabbeinu Kodesh, ki goyin Daniel, like as if there's just someone who's like Rebbe or someone who's like Daniel? So here he says that ki goyin is not. It doesn't mean Kigoyin like Daniel. It could be Daniel himself. And we know again, Daniel, if I'm not mistaken, was from the house of David. The Rebbe was for sure from the house of David. Kigoyin Rabbeinu Kodesh, Kleimer, Imeish Dugmasi B'chaim, Hainu Rabbeinu Kodesh, V'im Dugmahu L'Meisem, Hainu Kigoyin Daniel Ish Chamudais. Okay, and the other opinion is that it's not talking about Rebbe himself or Daniel himself, but someone like Rebbe or someone like Daniel. So Rashi brings down two opinions. It either means Rebbe and Daniel themselves, or someone as if on that level. It says, it says Reb Nachman, who said it's like me. He was the son-in-law of Rabban Gamliel, and he was from the descendants of David. So therefore, he felt he was worthy. And he says Rebbe also, the Marsha says, he says like this. Just like Rav Nachman was from the house of David, so too Rebbe was from the house of David, and therefore and he also was a king. He was the Nasi, so therefore for him to become the Moshiach was regular. So okay, let's continue the Gemara. Rav Yehuda Rav. Now Rabbi Yehuda is a student of Rav. He says like this. This is a very complicated Gemara. These are all complicated Gemaras. But this is a Gemara that's quoted many times. Rav Yehuda Rav. Rabbi Yehuda says the name of Rav. God is going to assign a second David. Not David, a second David. Shnemer v'avdu eis Hashem Elokehem v'es David Malkam asher okim lehem. I'm going to bring, okim is futuristic. I'm going to establish, not hakim, that he was already established, but another David is going to be there for the Jewish people. Hakim lo nemer, it doesn't say that I did establish, hakim I will establish. Amalei Rav Papa Abaya, so Rav Papa said to Abaya, questioning Rav Yehud in the name of Rav. Again, Rav Papa and Abaya lived a little later. V'chsiv, how could you say that God is going to bring another David? We have another verse. The verse says, "V'David avdi nasi lam lahaila," that David himself will be king forever. So how could you say that there's going to be another David? So the Gemara answers, "Going Keser, Rapalgi Keser." Again, it's a hard Gemara. There's going to be a king, a Keser like a Caesar, and a substitute one, and a viceroy. And the viceroy depends. The question is a machlekes: who's going to be the viceroy? Who's going to be the king? The Rishonim, the commentaries debate if David himself is going to be the viceroy or David's going to be the king, or Moshiach is going to be the viceroy. So he says, David Acher Sha'asid Lim Lechalem. Rashi says there's going to be another David. Akim Hakim Le'nemer Al Akim. He doesn't say that I did establish, but I will establish. He going Keser, Pagi Keser. Melech V'Sheni Lei, a king and a viceroy. Kain David Achadesh Melech. So Rashi learns the new David, which is probably referring to the Moshiach, is going to be the king. David Malcolm Asher Okim V'David HaMelech Sheni Lei. And King David will be the viceroy to the new David. Because it says, he said, Rashi quotes the verse. It doesn't say that David is going to be a king. It says the word Nasi. Nasi is not the same as a king. Nasi is a prince. So because he uses the word prince as opposed to the word king, so therefore Rashi learns that it's a viceroy. In the Aruch, it explains that David will be king of Israel, and the Moshiach, which is the new David, will be the viceroy. So the Aruch disagrees with Rashi and says that that the viceroy will be Mashiach. So he just explains what it means. What does it mean, emperor and a viceroy? The expression addresses a situation that existed in Roman Empire for a period of time after the decollation instituted reforms in Roman political system. Beginning then, not only was the empire divided under the rule of various supreme leaders, but each of those leaders who were given the name Augustus had a viceroy who was also an independent leader, a bit lower in the chain of command. He was given the title of Caesar, not Augustus, I guess. This governmental structure was a pardigim to the end of days when there will be an emperor and a viceroy. I guess like we have today, a president and a vice president. Okay. Darish Rab Simloi. Rab Simloi says like this. Okay, I just want to say that Rashi again says that David's going to be the king. The Aruch says David's going to be the king and Mashiach is going to be his viceroy. The Yad Ramah says we don't know how these things are going to be, and therefore it's all a mashal, it's all an example, it's all a riddle. And for us to understand, not to get too into details, Mashiach is going to be the viceroy, Mashiach is going to be the king, David's going to be the viceroy. The Yad Ramah says these are above. Basically, this Gemorah is above our pay grade, and we shouldn't try to understand it literally. Rab Simlai says, what does it say? Hashem. It says, woe to you who desire the day of the Lord. It says, why would you have this day of the Lord? It's darkness and not light. It says, Moshel, it's an example of Tarnagol v'atlef. You have a chicken and a bat. A bat is blind, right? Or they're both waiting for the light. The chicken tells the bat, it makes sense that I'm waiting for the light because I see. So if I could see, I benefit from the light. The light makes sense to me. The chicken asks the bat, what's the difference to you if it's morning? For you, it's all the same thing. You're blind anyways. So what does he mean to say? This is a reference to the Jews and the nations. The Jewish people are waiting for Mashiach because for us it's going to be an expression of light. But the nations, they're not tapping into that light. If they're not tapping into that light, so why are they waiting for the Mashiach? So he says, Sha'ira Shalihu, Rashi says. Oh, Atlef, he says, is I don't know what this is. Kalba Shuritz Balaz. I think it's a bat. They don't have eyes. Sha'ira Shali, okay, it's not blind, it has no eyes. Sha'ira Shalihu, Sheesh Li'anayim, I have eyes. Lirois V'nimsasi, Nenesi Ba, so therefore I have eyes, so I could see, therefore I take pleasure in light. Kach Yisrael, Matapim Megula, therefore it makes sense for the Jewish people to wait for redemption. Sheyoyim Hashem Yir Lehem Or, because the day of God, meaning the day Mashiach comes, is going to be a light. But the nations, the idol worshippers, I say, why are they waiting for the Mashiach? It's going to be darkness, not light. Okay, I'm not sure what this commentary is in figuring out what the atlef is. An atlef is obviously, I believe, always translated as a bat. So the Gemara now continues like this. Let's go a little further. The Gemara says, this would happen when a certain heretic said to Rabbi Abo, when is Mashiach going to come? He's also waiting for Mashiach, right? When darkness will cover those people. He's referring to you, to the person himself. When you're going to be in darkness, that's when Mashiach is going to come. He said to him, he said to him, are you cursing me? Like it should be dark? It says a clear verse. Darkness will cover the world. And a fog will cover the nations. And the Jewish people, Yisrach Hashem, there's going to be the shining of God. And his glory will shine upon you. So I'm not sure the Rashi is just giving a girsa. Okay, he doesn't go into how the heretic handled that verse. but that's just how the conversation went. Tanya, we learned. Now we're going to go into how long are the days of Mashiach. Rabbi Lezer Rebbe says, "Imaisa Mashiach Abayim Shana." Okay, I'm not sure. Again, I have to see the Hagdam of the Rambam again on Preke Chelek, how the Rambam views these years. Are they part of the 6,000 years or not part of the 6,000 years? The reason I say that is we are now, again, 215 years from 6,000 years. Not a long time. 215 years, I mean, naturally, most of us won't be alive in 215 years if Mashiach doesn't come, God forbid. But it's not so far away, 250 years. And the Gemorah says that everyone agrees the world cannot exist past 6,000 years. So the cutoff date is 215 years from today, less a little. So Tanya Rabbi Lezer Eimer, Yemaisa Mashiach, the days of Mashiach are Arbaim Shana, 40 years. And he quotes the verse that we say on Friday night, Arbaim Shana Akit Badar. 40 years you were held in a generation. Rabbi Lezer ben Azariah Eimer Shivim Shana. It's not going to be 40 years, it's going to be 70 years. So 70 years are going to be, hey Lezer, are going to be the years of Mashiach. After this is again, these are talking about the Yemaisa Mashiach, the stages and different times in resurrection of the dead and Olam Haba. But the days of Mashiach himself, again, there's a lot of arguments between the Nachmanides, the Ramban, and the Rambam. What are these days? Are these going to be regular days or not regular days? So he says. So thank you. So he says, Rabbi Lezer ben Azariah says 70 years. Again, Rabbi Lezer ben Azariah, we learned, we know that he very much connected to the number 70, because he said, Arei ani ben shivim shana, I'm like 70 years. And his 70 years weren't really 70 years. He was only 17 years old. It says, and it shall come to pass on the day that they shall, that tired, sore, will be forgotten for 70 days, 70 years. Melech echad, according to the days of one king. Eze melech, not echad, but miyuchad, the unique king. And who is the unique king? The new king is talking about Moshiach. Have'omer is Moshiach. So Rabbi Lezer ben Azariah says that it's 70 years. He quotes a verse 70 years. Rabbi Lezer quotes the verse that we have in Tillim that is really referencing towards the generation of the desert. Again, we're going to see soon that all the generations are connected to events that happen. 40 years in the desert, 70 years could be equivalent to the 70 years of exile of the first temple. So he says like this: Akut b'dor. Rashi says, "Ekoch Yisrael ve'emlech aleim k'moy nikita arbaim shana ekoit b'dor kotin shal arbaim shana." I'm going to take them in a small generation, 40 years. He calls a small generation. Shumishuna midari shrafanov, be different than the previous generations. Mistam mahan Mashiach means to say this is Mashiach. Sheshinun g'doil miyir b'doirei. There's going to be great changes in the generations of Mashiach. Upshita dekra miya gabi meisi midbar. But really, the pasuk is talking about the people who died in the desert after 40 years. So even though it could have said the terminology ekoit is futuristic, I'm going to gather, and therefore, even though it's the verse is traditionally talking about the generation of the desert, but the generation of the desert is the generation of Mashiach, and to be like the generation of the desert. Okay, we know that it's brought down in Kabbalistic teachings. That Rizal says that our generation, means the generation before Mashiach, is a reincarnation of the generation of the desert. The generation of Mashiach are the souls of the generation of the desert. So whether it's to rectify that, etc., but it's brought down in Kabbalistic teaching. So now here we see the correlation between the 40 years of the desert and the 40 years of Mashiach. So that's why he says Meyuchat Chashav, that who's going to be the special king is going to be the Mashiach. The what's it called? He says the Yad Ramah says, because it says before that Hayom B'Kol Tishmo. It says Hayom B'Kol Tishmo right before the verse of Abayim Shana Akit Badar, and therefore we see clearly that there's an attribute. We know that that verse is talking about Mashiach, so therefore there's a connection to the 40 years and the Mashiach. Okay, there's many correlations between the generation of the desert and the generation of Mashiach, and therefore who was that opinion? That opinion was Rabbi Lezer, who says that therefore the time of Mashiach is going to be like the time of the desert. Rabbi says So we have Rebbe Lezer and we have Rebbe Lezer ben Azariah. Rebbe says Shleisha Dairis is going to be 3 generations. He doesn't say how long those generations are going to be. The Mashah, I just want to add, the Mashiach, when the Mashah quotes the verse that says, on that day we're going to forget Sur, Tyre, and there's going to be 70 years, one king, a unique king. So Rashi says a unique king, meaning Mashiach. The Mashah adds, not only that, there's going to be only one king. There's going to be no other kings in the world in the days of Mashiach. Rebbe says that there's going to be 3 generations. Shnemar Yiraucha im Shamesh v'lifnei yareach dor doirim. So it says like this: may they fear you as long as the sun and the moon endure throughout the generations. So it says the word dor and doirim. Dor is 1. Doirim is plural. The minimum of plural is 2. So 2 and 1 is 3 generations. Rabbi Hillel Leimer. Now we get back to this Rabbi Hillel again. Rabbi Hillel says, and he's again the grandson of Rabbi, so he argues on his grandfather, that Ein Lahem Mashiach L'Yisrael Shekvar Achlu B'Me'ach Chizkiyahu. Mashiach is not going to come because we, so to say, they already came in the days of Chizkiyahu, the king Chizkiyahu. When we see Rashi says, I'm just going to jump Rashi before we get to the other commentaries. Rashi says, Hachi in Rabbi Omer Gimel Dairos. What does it mean 3 generations? Shema Yeruchim Shemesh. Bahadi Mashiach Shekasabay Lifnei Shemesh Yin and Shema. We said before that Mashiach is like the sun. Yerucha Yisrael, they should have fear. Lifnei Reach Lifnei Malchus Beisav Shnim Shal Kireach. So both Mashiach is like the sun, and the house of David is like the house of David is the source of Mashiach. Is like the sun, like the moon, like it says, Kireach Yichain Oilam. K'mayken Yerucha Dar Darim Dar Achar Dar Darim is Beis is Hari Gimel. Dar is Echad and Darim is 2. Therefore, you have 3 generations. So Reb Hillel says, Ein La Mashiach L'Yisrael El Kadosh Baruch Hu Yimlech Ba'atzmi V'Yigalim Levadei. So the not that there's not going to be redemption, but that there's not going to be a Mashiach. It's going to be God's going to redeem them. So obviously, what's the obvious question to that? I want to just get to the end, and then we're going to finish the class. The obvious question to that is that what's so wrong with that? If you have a choice between a Mashiach and God redeeming you, it's not like he makes it sound as if it's going to be lacking something. So that's the opinion that Rashi says that Mashiach is going to, that the redemption will come, but through God, not through Mashiach. That's the opinion of Rashi, and the Ran, Rabbeinu Nissen, agrees with that. The Anaf Yosef writes in the name of the Torah Sa'ola that that means to say that there's not going to, the Jewish people won't be worthy of the Mashiach, but there's going to be because they're sinners, but God's going to bring the Mashiach anyways for Himself. But not that the Jewish people are worthy of Mashiach. They were worthy of Mashiach in the generation of Chizkiyahu, but not in the time that he's going to come. Now I just want to say, because this is an important thing, not to quote this Reb Hillel. So the Anaf Yosef says in the name of Torah Ola, he says, even if you want to say, however you want to look at what Reb Hillel says, the Mashiach won't come, God will redeem them. He says, Ein halacha k'maisei. The ruling, no one agrees. It means the law is not according to Hillel. But Oymer, he says, Shekim like Rebbe Hillel Shem Mashiach. Whoever says, I'm in the opinion, I hold like Hillel, that there won't be a Mashiach for the Jewish people. Haru Kaifil B'klal Torah. He's a kaifer. He's a person who's a heretic who doesn't believe in Torah. Shrei Achi Rabban Hatis. The Torah says you have to go with the majority. And because the majority do not agree with this Hillel, after that, no one can take the opinion of Hillel. Like the law is, you can't be a person, right? We learned the Gemorah that Reb Tarfon, I think, said that he went like the house of Shammai. Once the law was like the house of Hillel, he says, I was worthy to be killed because I followed the house of Shammai. We learned that in the Gemorah Brachas. And he writes, and look, and the Chassam Sofer agrees with that also. The Yad Ramah asks the obvious question. Well, how could Rashi and Ran say that Mashiach is not going to come, but God's going to redeem them? So why is that a negative? That should be a positive. So therefore, he doesn't agree with Rashi that's the opinion of Hillel. Well, let's see what Rabbi Steinsaltz says, and then we'll go on to the final part of the Gemara. There are several opinions with regard to the meaning of the statement of Hillel. Some explain that it means that the redemption will not be brought about by a person, but rather by God himself, like Rashi says. Others explain that Rabbi Hillel believes that the Jewish people will not be redeemed, which is what the Ramah says. Again, that's Hillel's opinion. Yet others explain that it means that the Jewish people are no longer entitled to the Mashiach, since the reward described in those prophecies were already enjoyed during the region of Chizkiyahu. When the Mashiach comes, it will not be because of the Jewish people deserve it, rather it'll be for the glory of God, which again I quoted the Torah Ola. Okay, but the Gemara now right away argues on Hillel. Amar Rav Yosef means before we found that there's many opinions that talk about Mashiach, but we don't find that there's an argument. Here, Rav Yosef doesn't allow for that statement to stand. Amar Rav Yosef says, Shira le Mari Rabbi Hillel. He says, may the master forgive me. Rabbi Hillel meaning, for stating matters with no basis. Because he's just said something without a basis. Why? Chizkiyahu Emes Hava. When was the king Chizkiyahu? The Bayis Rishon in the first temple. Vilu Zechariah. When was Zechariah? Kamas Nav Bayis Sheni. He was a prophet in the second temple. For Omer, and Zechariah says, Gili mi'oid bas Sion. Hari bas Yerushalayim. Hine malkech Yavai. Lach tzadik v'noishu. Ani v'reichav al-chamar. Val ayer ben asaynes. This is a prophecy about the coming Mashiach. What does Zechariah say? Rejoice, great daughters of Zion. Shout, daughters of Jerusalem. Behold, your king will come to you, and he is just and victorious, lowly and riding upon a donkey and upon a colt and the fowl of a donkey. Meaning to say, in the generations after Chizkiyahu, there are prophecies about both redemption and the coming of Mashiach. So how could Hillel say that Mashiach came in the time of Chizkiyahu? There's prophecies afterwards. The only question is you have to find out who the Zechariah is. So he says, he says, let God forgive Rabbi Hillel. Again, Rabbi Hillel wasn't a nobody. He was a great sage. But he says, let God forgive him for making a statement that he feels is not accurate. When did Zechariah say the prophecy about Mashiach? During the beginning of the second temple. We have in Trei Yasser, which is the final of the prophets' prophecies, is about the coming of Mashiach. Now he says, when we find later, when we learned earlier, that when Nebuchadnezzar came in Nebuchadnezzar and he saw the blood of Zechariah boiling in the first temple, that's not the same Zechariah. That was Zechariah ben Yehoyada. HaKoyin, Shniva Bayis Rishon, he was the prophet in the first temple. Zechariah ben Birchia, this is the second Zechariah. Shaib Malchus Daryavish, he was in the time of Daryavish, which was in the beginning of the second temple. Okay, the Gemara is going to continue after this with different opinions of what are the days of how long are the days of Mashiach. Again, from the numbers we're going to see, we started off with 40 and 70, and now the numbers are going to start getting a little greater. They're going to be thousands upon thousands of years. Obviously way past the boundary of 6,000 years. So obviously this means to say that the 6,000 years is the years before Mashiach. That's the deadline, but Mashiach obviously is going to come before that. The question is, how long will it be? The 40 years, but again, there's many opinions of how the days of Mashiach are going to be together with the resurrection of the dead, and then Olam Haba. We'll learn about that next class, about how does this work with Olam Haba. All right, any questions before we sign off tonight? Guess not. Okay, Laila Tov, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, Rabbi.